All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we are going to decode the actual philosophical mechanics behind how we understand reality. We're diving into an absolutely fascinating paper called As It Is in Relation, which asks a seriously mind-bending question: how do we actually know what we know? And think about this. When we learn something brand new, does the world itself change, or do we? To get us in the perfect headspace for this, just consider this quote by the brilliant mathematician Srinivasa Ramanujan. By stating that an equation literally has no meaning to him unless it expresses a thought of God, he beautifully merges this hyper-rigorous logic with a deep, deep sense of awe. And that exact intersection where strict structure meets deep relational truth is exactly what we're unpacking today. Now, at first glance, mapping out the theology, history, and reality looks a bit like a giant, wildly complex puzzle. But the core argument hiding inside this web of ideas is actually incredibly elegant. It essentially proves that our understanding of reality can drastically evolve over time, without the underlying reality itself changing one single bit. Since we're tackling some pretty heavy philosophical frameworks today, we're going to climb this intellectual mountain methodically. We'll hit 6 specific steps: the grammar of reality, the 6 stages of relation, the twin errors, analogical assent, recursive return, and finally the transfiguration test case. Okay, let's kick things off with part 1, the grammar of reality, where we build our epistemic toolkit. To get our basic vocabulary down, the author uses this great little translation device called Angela's Explainer, which is basically just a dad explaining really big ideas to his kid. First up in the toolkit is being. In academic philosophy, this is considered ontologically primitive. But, as Angela's dad might put it, it just means something exists. Before you can even begin to figure out what a thing does, you have to make the extremely basic observation that, well, there is a thing. It's the absolute starting line of reality. Next up, we have distinction. This just means establishing that one thing is not another thing. It's the fundamental rule of this is not that. You are you, and your shoe is your shoe. Your shoe is definitely not you. Distinction is absolutely crucial, because if everything were secretly everything else, civilization would pretty much collapse on the spot. We literally have to be able to tell things apart to make any sense of the world. Third is relation. This shows us that things can be totally, completely different, yet still be deeply connected. Think about it. You are related to your dad, but you are not actually your dad. Right? You are 2 very distinct beings, but there is an undeniable, intelligible connection that orders you toward one another. Finally, we have nature. Nature tells us exactly how a thing participates in a relationship. For example, a human and an artificial intelligence might both receive words and respond to a prompt, but they definitely don't do it in the exact same mode. Their specific natures dictate the mode in which they act and receive information. All right, moving right along to part 2, the 6 stages of relation. Let's see how this dynamic process of understanding actually works in motion. The paper uses a fantastic analogy here. Moving all the way from reception to communion is a lot like being handed a wrapped box. First, you receive it. That's reception. You open it up and start playing the board game inside before you even fully understand how it works. That's participation. Eventually, it clicks, and you recognize the actual rules, recognition. You stay faithful to those rules instead of cheating. That's fidelity. You continue playing through the whole game, continuity. And ultimately, you share a true, fulfilled connection with the other players, which is communion. You see, you can't just jump straight to the end. It's a very specific step-by-step progression. But as humans, we usually mess this up. Which brings us to part 3, the twin errors, and the struggle to find the middle path of reality. We almost always fall into one of 2 traps: collapse or severance. Collapse is when we just squish things together because they look kinda similar, like assuming a human teacher and an AI are the exact same thing just because they both give you answers. Severance is the exact opposite. It's pretending different things have absolutely nothing in common and literally can't be connected at all. So, the golden rule of this whole paper is finding that perfect Goldilocks balance. You must preserve the distinction, and you must preserve the relation. That takes us to part 4, analogical assent. This is explaining the actual method. So how do we safely compare different relationships? Like, say, a dad teaching a kid to fix a bike versus a coach teaching a kid to play basketball. Well, analogical assent requires some pretty strict rules to avoid those twin errors we just talked about. First, you have to identify the actual participants. Next, preserve their distinct identities. The coach doesn't just magically become the dad. Then figure out exactly what is being transmitted, whether that's instruction or formation, and finally track what stays the same and what changes without getting greedy and assuming the two scenarios are 100% identical. Once we successfully climb up and learn something useful from that comparison, we don't just stay up there in the clouds. We move to part 5, recursive return, and this is where the real paradigm shift happens. To really wrap your head around recursive return, ask yourself this one question. Did the object change, or did your history change? Imagine someone hands you a super blurry photo of a mystery animal. You have no clue what it is, but later they show you some footprints and play a crisp audio recording of a howl. Suddenly, you look back at that very first blurry photo, and it makes perfect sense. It's a wolf. The photo didn't magically rewrite itself, right? Your historical access simply caught up with reality. You returned to the exact same object, but you were different. And that brings us to part 6, the transfiguration test case. The paper treats this historical biblical narrative like a literal epistemic detective story to prove how recursive return actually works in practice. If we track the witness Peter through this timeline, we see a wild progression. He goes from seeing a glowing, majestic Jesus on a mountain to a distressed Jesus in Gethsemane, to the crucifixion, and finally to the resurrection. The paper points out something crucial. Jesus' core identity didn't actually change through all of this. Instead, Peter's historical access simply transformed. The reality stayed exactly the same. It was Peter's accessibility that finally caught up. We see this exact same dynamic play out when Jesus raises Lazarus. Before the miracle even happens, Jesus prays out loud, explicitly stating he's only doing it for the people standing around listening. His out loud prayer isn't some kind of upgrade to God, and it definitely isn't an experiment to see if God is listening. It's a window. It is intentionally meant to update the crowd's understanding of a reality that was already perfect. The witnesses are the variables being formed here, not the underlying divine relationship. So, here is the ultimate big picture takeaway from this entire explainer. Truth is not created by our better understanding of it. We do not invent reality by simply recognizing it. Our mental models, our representations, and our historical journeys, they are just getting closer to a reality that was already fully present the whole time. Reality remains exactly what it is. History just changes our accessibility to it. Knowing that your own understanding is on this continuous, history-modified journey, I want to leave you with something to think about in your own life. We don't invent reality, we receive it. So what realities in your world are just sitting there, waiting for your accessibility and your history to finally catch up? Keep learning, keep updating your history, and I'll see you in the next explainer.